of protecting pre-existing conditions in court. And who was the man behind that awful decision? Chad Readler, President Trump's nominee for the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. I'm not exaggerating. He wasn't just some lawyer who filed an amicus brief. He was the chief cook and bottle washer in the effort to take away protections of pre-existing conditions from people. He was the lead counsel. He led the brief, arguing that protections for Americans with pre-existing conditions should be eliminated. His recommendations were so outrageous that Justice Department officials refused to sign the statement. Many of the attorneys in justice said, this is such a reach, so ridiculous, we ain't signing. And then guess what? In an administration where you're never shocked to see what they'll do next, this one is shocking. The day after he filed his brief, he was nominated for a lifetime appointment. Seems like they were saying, Chad, you did a good job taking away people's health care. Now you can get a lifetime appointment to the bench. Coincidence that it happened one day later? I don't think so. The nomination is the latest example of the Trump administration's and the Republican Party's all-out assault on pre-existing conditions. Now, we have many of our Republican colleagues who have said, campaigning and otherwise, they want to protect pre-existing conditions. Now's their test. Now's their test. How are they going to vote on Readler? Anyone who, in a campaign, or as he goes around his or her state, says, I want to protect pre-existing conditions, and then votes for Readler, is performing an amazing act of hypocrisy. So later today, when the Senate has a cloture vote on Readler, every Republican will be forced to show the American people whether or not they stand for protecting pre-existing conditions. They stand for getting more Americans health care, more Americans Medicaid, and stand for making sure that health plans cover maternity care and prescription drugs. A vote to confirm Mr. Readler is very simply an endorsement of the lawsuit to eliminate pre-existing conditions. Plain and simple. And we are watching, the American people are watching our Republican colleagues on this issue. Senator Brown.
Sure. Chad Readler is a clear and immediate threat to the health coverage of millions and millions of Americans who have pre-existing condition. Last summer, as Leader Schumer said, Readler did what 3 career attorneys with Department of Justice would not do. They refused to do. He filed the brief challenging the law, protecting Americans, taking away the consumer protections, the protections that Americans have, those with pre-existing condition. And as the leader said, Chad Readler was rewarded by being nominated to be a judge the very next day. I spoke to the White House about him ahead of time. I spoke to the White House ahead of time about Eric Murphy. I asked the White House personally, the White House chief counsel personally, to pick someone who was in the mainstream instead of someone who had built a career attacking Americans' health care, and in the case of Eric Murphy, who had tried to restrict access to contraceptives for women, who had defended efforts to defund Planned Parenthood, who fought for big tobacco. I personally asked the White House to send us 2 other judges who were qualified, also conservative, but not far right, not out of the mainstream. The White House refused. And we know with Chad Readler, 3 career attorneys withdrew from the case we were talking about. One went so far as to resign all in objection to the Department of Justice's unprecedented actions on protecting the public with pre-existing condition. One Republican senator called Readler's arguments in the brief as far-fetched as he had ever seen, as far-fetched as he had ever seen. That comes from a Republican senator. The president's other nominee, Eric Murphy, also threatens America's health, as I said, with position on women's health and his positions on big tobacco. That's why, even though they're both Ohioans, And even though I always fight for my state, in this case, I fight for my state again because I want to protect people's health care. I want to keep the consumer protections for those with pre-existing condition and protecting women, especially in our state, from two people who will have lifetime appointments to the federal judiciary if we don't vote them down. Senator Murphy next.
Great. Thank you very much, Sherrod. Thank you, Chuck. Listen, it's no secret. Republicans have spent the last 2 years trying every tactic available to them to try to take protections away from sick people in this country, people who have cancer diagnoses, people who have children with serious heart ailments. Republicans have used every lever at their disposal to try to strip away protections for people with pre-existing conditions. They spent an entire year trying to pass a piece of legislation that would take those protections away. They have spent the last 2 years stacking the Supreme Court with justices that will eventually overturn the Affordable Care Act. And now they are sending a very clear signal to everyone inside the administration that if you stand up and lead on the issue of taking away protections for people with pre-existing conditions, you will be rewarded. So you are going to have a whole bunch of other people in the Justice Department scrambling to try to figure out how they can try to make a name for themselves on taking protections away from people with pre-existing conditions, because the signal has been sent loud and clear. If you stand up to try to take people's health care away in this administration, you're going to get a job for life. The consequences of that lawsuit that Chad Readler filed, again, a lawsuit that others in the Justice Department refused to file, are absolutely cataclysmic. Lamar Alexander was the senator who said that the arguments were far-fetched because he knew what that lawsuit would lead to. It would ultimately lead to 20 million people who receive insurance coverage through the ACA losing it overnight. It would result in 133 million Americans with pre-existing conditions to have their rates jacked up to the point where many of them couldn't afford it overnight, including 30 million Americans who are aged 55 to 64, whose insurance is already more expensive than others. Readler's filing in the pre-existing conditions lawsuit would have resulted in a cataclysmic humanitarian catastrophe in this country, all to make a political point. This is just another brick in the wall. Republicans have made it very clear that they are going to stop at nothing in order to try to take these protections away simply because the protections have President Obama's name on it, not because they aren't wildly popular amongst the public. And this is an up or down vote. You know, we don't get these votes very often when pre-existing conditions and protections for people with pre-existing conditions are on the floor of the Senate. This vote this week is one of those occasions. Senator Rona.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to join my colleagues in raising the hue and cry for a clear and present danger that everyone in our country who has pre-existing conditions face with the nomination of Chad Readler. Let me set the stage for you. There is court packing going on every single day, and every Judiciary Committee hearing, this is a committee I sit on, we have many nominees, nominee after nominee, pretty much handpicked by the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation, for nominees who will not set aside their ideological perspectives with their lifetime appointments to the judiciary. And of course, this starts with two Supreme Court justices, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. There's a lot of auditioning going on for these lifetime appointments, and Chad Readler has certainly auditioned for his job by signing that brief as the head of the Civil Division in the Department of Justice. This is a division that is actually supposed to be defending laws, not signing on to undo them. But as head of this division, he led the charge. And when he came before the Judiciary Committee, I asked him, what was his role in the Justice Department? Very unusual for them not to defend a duly enacted law by Congress. And he waffled and all that, saying, well, he talked to others. No, the fact of the matter is, you see, his name appears first on that brief. And you heard that position was so unusual and outrageous that 3 other lawyers in the Department of Justice refused to even sign on to the brief. So court stacking is proceeding apace. President Trump, aided and abetted by Leader Mitch McConnell, is setting aside really the norms of the Judiciary Committee to pack the courts with as many of these ideologically driven judges who, by the way, even if they tell us we'll just follow precedent, the minute they get into their lifetime positions, they begin to do the opposite. And exhibit number 1 on that is Neil Gorsuch, who said he would follow precedent, and the first chance he got, he writes a dissent on an abortion case that directly contradicted a Supreme Court decision that had been made only fewer than 5 years earlier. So fully 1/10 of the judiciary will be Trump-appointed, ideologically driven judges, and more to come. We know that health care is important to everyone in this country. It's the number one concern that people have, regardless of what political stripe you are. And if they knew that this is the person who led the charge really in the challenge to the Affordable Care Act in the Texas court, which court, by the way, deemed the entire law to be unconstitutional, that lawsuit is going to head to the Supreme Court, where Neil Gorsuch and Kavanaugh await, ready and willing to undo protections for millions of people in our country. And this is why there is a clear and present danger, and the more people who know what's going on, the better. And certainly I would hope that all of our Republican colleagues who care about protections for people with pre-existing conditions will see the signs and not put this guy on the court for a lifetime position. Thank you.
Thank my colleagues. Questions for any of us first on this subject?
So I'm curious to know if you think if there was still a 60-vote threshold, you would be able to block Readler on cloture, and if so, do you regret not, that you used the nuclear option in 2013 and now can't stop?
I think without question, this nominee would not get on the bench. The 60-vote threshold brought parties together and picked more judges to be moderate. We have seen a tremendous abuse of this way beyond that vote. Supreme Court, which we left intact. And then the worst abuse of all is Leader McConnell allowing Merrick Garland to just hang out on the floor for a long time.
Are any of your colleagues still happy about the nuclear option and supporting that?
Getting rid of the 60-vote requirement for Supreme Court justices is really crossing a line. And that's one of the first things that Mitch McConnell did, because he wants to get as many of these lifetime appointees on the bench as possible.
What about Reed and the Democrats?
Well, you got to go over the history here. The D.C. Circuit, the second most important circuit, had 4 vacancies, and they were blocking every single one. Where this started was not with what Harry Reid proposed, but with Mitch McConnell, once again, just blocking any judge that he didn't want. Before that, there was some comity.
Yeah, President Obama, I'm not on the Judiciary Committee, but I've been here now my 3rd term. President Obama and President Bush, to some degree, they put judges on, a little too conservative in my mind by Bush, but put judges on that many of them were mainstream American jurists. And this administration and so did President Obama, put people on that were mainstream American jurists. This administration has put people so much out of the mainstream. As I said, I went to the White House. I had 2 judges that I suggested to the White House for these 2 seats. They were people that had gone through the bipartisan commission process that Senator Portman and I put together for district judges. They would have been acceptable. I would have gone to my colleagues and said, I'm going to blue slip this. These 2 judges are too conservative in my mind, but at least are mainstream and mature and experienced. And the White House said, nope, we're going to pick these 2, in my mind, very extreme, out of the mainstream, who attack Planned Parenthood, who attack the consumer protections for pre-existing condition, who fight for tobacco companies, who undermine the health care and the health status of millions of Americans.
You could have blocked that.
Let me just
Yeah,
say,
but you just are taking a slice of history at one moment. McConnell was blocking judges long before that, and Bill Clinton, and then even Barack Obama. Most of the judges, if you said 10 is the most liberal, 1 is the most conservative, 5's in the middle, most of Clinton and Obama's judges were 6s, 7s, a little more on the left side, but not extreme. The right wing, since George Bush came in, has put extreme judges who don't even believe what most Republicans believe. Witness Chad Readler. So, you know, it's very easy. You always ask this question. I respect that. But it's very easy to slice it at one moment. Maybe you should slice it the day Merrick Garland was held up. This started when the hard right realized that they could not move America to the place they wanted on workers' rights, on LGBT rights, on women's rights, on siding with average workers as opposed to the big special interests. And so they decided to pack the bench. And that's what's happened.
And whether Harry Reid did that or not, Mitch McConnell was going to. Look what he did with the Supreme Court. I mean,
Yeah.
Mitch McConnell always is doing whatever he can to please the Koch brothers.
Now he got rid of blue slips
Yeah.
for all the years. Why don't you, I hope you ask them that whenever they have a press conference on this. Pat Leahy accepted every blue slip when he was the chairman of Judiciary. They undid it. Now they want to change the rules. It's been a constant stream. And the rare moment where we responded is what you asked about. What about all the rest? We have not done this. Just one more point. When Bush was president and Pataki was governor, we had an agreement. I would nominate, along with Senator Clinton, who was then my colleague, 1 out of 3. They would nominate 2 out of 3, but we'd each have a veto power over the other. And that created judges who were in the middle. Doesn't happen, not because of us. Next question.
we should,
Yes.
let me
Go
just
ahead,
add,
Maisie.
let me just add, we should recognize the magnitude of difference between requiring a majority vote for district court and circuit court nominees versus a majority vote for members who sit on the Supreme Court. You're going to see a lot more states enacting all kinds of laws that will restrict, for example, a woman's right to choose. You'll see a lot more of the Texas kind of lawsuit because the Federal Society Heritage Foundation, Mitch McConnell, and President Trump know that they have people on the Supreme Court who will be on their page. So what do they care if the laws that we pass can be undone by all these unelected, well, judicial, sitting there on the judicial in our courts for lifetime appointments, but nothing could be more important than packing the United States Supreme Court. I know you all see the ads already because the Trump administration thinks that they're going to get yet another nominee. They're going to get another shot at making the Supreme Court, where so many of these laws will be challenged and probably upheld if they're restrictive on individual rights, civil rights, women's rights. You'll see the states passing these kinds of laws apace, and all going up to the Supreme Court, where we will be screwed.
Yes. We will not take as long to answer your question as we did to my dear friend from CNN, who asked it a lot, but he's entitled and he's a very good reporter. Oh, well, next, no.
And I do have an ACA question, too. So, but real quick on norms, now the Senate is talking about even changing the rules.
Of course, that's what they do.
Are you going to, it sounds like you're not going to be able to.
Well, you know what I said to Lamar Alexander? I said, why can't we work out a compromise? I said, restore the blue slips and then let's talk about a compromise. You can't just keep pushing and pushing and pushing and making it more and more partisan on the issues where you have control, and then when you need a rules change, come to us and say let's compromise and go only halfway further. Get rid of the blue slips. Restore the blue slips, rather. Well, they can go nuclear and change the rules. Just remember, in that New York Times article, Mitch McConnell said the proudest thing he did was hold up Merrick Garland. That speaks volumes.
Then on ACA, can you just quickly talk about, this was such a big issue during the campaign, and healthcare was a big issue, but here you are struggling to get some Republican senators.
Yeah, but they will, because healthcare was such a big issue, we elected some good senators. Joe Manchin kept his seat. Tester kept his seat. We got 2 great new senators in Arizona and Nevada, and more importantly, for the balance, we took back the House. Health care was the #1 issue. They're not going to be able to repeal anything else. Yes, Sherrod Brown kept his seat as well, Chris Murphy and Mazie Hirono.
listen,
Where I know we're standing here as decorations, but
it matters to us.
And to me.
You. No, I think it's fascinating that Senator McConnell acts as if Republicans won the election. I mean, you're right. It's going to be hard to get Republicans to vote against this guy, despite the fact that it is going to be another proof point as to Republicans' insistence on tearing down health care protections. I think Republicans act at their peril in the Senate, believing that they can continue business as usual, fighting the ACA after what happened in 2018. The map was pretty awful for Senate Democrats. It's not as awful in 2020 and 2022. And if they keep this up, that's a pretty quick pathway to the minority.
Last question.
So are you saying that Senator Alexander didn't indicate a willingness to negotiate on the issue of USIRFs vis-a-vis?
He said, go to Mitch McConnell, who I've gone to umpteen times, and he's the one who initiated the change. You may remember, McConnell said he was going to do it, and Grassley was not, he was then the chair of Judiciary, and he wavered for a while and then went along. They all go along, and it's a detriment to our democracy, and if you believe that judges should interpret the law, not make the law. Judges, I'd say on the far right or far left, tend to want to make the law. We've always had a situation where judges interpret the law until the hard right came to the conclusion that even when they had the Article 1 section of government, the Congress, and the Article 2 section, the presidency, they couldn't get their way. And they've come up with a very clever plan, which we will have to fight tooth and nail and will eventually undo, to take over the judiciary by changing all the rules. Thank you, everybody. No, I'm going to finish. That's it.